Hey customizers, welcome to the next episode of making something cartoon accurate on Talking Hands Customs. To all my subscribers, thank you very much, and if you're joining us for the first time, welcome to the show. In the last episode, we talked about what it meant to make something cartoon accurate and how far we were willing to take that. Do we change the shape? Do we just change the color? Do we make necessary repairs, which is always going to be a yes, hopefully. So now we're down to it, and what I've done is I've started cleaning up the design as we spoke about in the previous episode. So I took that serial number and I sanded it off. And what I'd like to draw your attention to in this case is that if you can see, the sheen is slightly different here from where I sanded. It's smooth, but it's probably a little bit less smooth in here, and you can tell because it's not as shiny as it is over here. That's going to let me introduce you to the next round of tools. You don't have to purchase these if you don't want to. Just keep in mind that one way or another, you're going to want to make this as smooth as you can so that it doesn't show through both your primer and your paint coat. If you're brush painting, that's honestly a little easier because the paint goes on thicker. But just keep in mind that any flaw you have in your surface can show through on the paint. So that tool can come in various forms. In this case, I'm going to show you my sanding pads. And these are superfine hobby sanding pads. I've used them to great effect. A lot of model builders use them as well. And if you notice the grits, they're crazy high numbers. 3200 grit, 3600 grit, 4000 grit, 6,000, 8,000, and 12,000. And at this point, this is almost like a buffing surface, if you will. It's very smooth. Most of these, relatively speaking, compared to 220 or 400 grit sandpaper, are very smooth, but they do help you in basically polish something. And that's kind of what we need to do here, is that you can sand away a detail and then bring that sanded plastic back up to the same sheen as the untouched plastic here. If this is not in your cards, it's not 100% required. But as we start to, let's say, dig into the plastic, you're gonna find that you'll have to come up with some kind of solution to bring the plastic back up to a level that can accept paint while hiding the work that you did. We don't want it to show with deep sanding grooves or anything like that. I checked my vintage Firebat, and it does indeed have these rivets on it. So that is a carryover from the original mold, but we're going to remove them for this project. And I've already started working on this fin. I didn't do anything fancy yet because I'm going to do some of that work here with you. All I did was basically kill some time on the one side. So on this side here, we've got the repair that was made, which was okay. I glued it together pretty quickly. So I'll have to sand that a bit, and then we're going to have to remove these rivets. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to take you can take a sanding piece of sanding paper or sanding stick, your sanding tool of choice, and remove those. But I'm going to show you that it can be done with a knife as well. Always maximum safety with the knife. And what I'll say about this is my particular style, or the way I like to teach myself or practice skills, is by not only repetition, but trying other things. It might seem like a bold move to try and remove these with a knife, but then it forces me to get better with handling the knife. The cuts can become more fine, more controlled, the more you practice, and this is certainly a worthwhile endeavor to improve your skill sets and potentially let you remove something that's a little more difficult than a detail that's on a flat open surface like this tail fin is here. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to place the meaty part of the knife, the thicker part of the blade, flush against the plastic, and I'm going to put my thumb somewhere on the part that can help me close that the knife blade, like this action here. And then I'm just going to go one at a time. And the thing is that you don't want to try and get these all in one go, because if you have to apply enough force, you could end up putting the blade in your thumb, and that's no bueno. But you certainly won't be short of red paint. Anyway, safety first, right? So here we're gonna go, and I'm gonna pop off. Actually, that first one already popped off on its own. And I'm just gonna go down to the second one and stop. And every time I stop, I actually squeeze my fingers together to stop the movement of the knife. Okay, we want maximum control here. I'm never trying to do all this in one shot. on purpose. If it does it by accident, okay. And the accident we don't want to have is the knife being embedded in my finger. The good news is, on a part like this, the slot here where it fits onto the wing actually has a little raised part, as you can see right there. So it actually acts as a natural stop for the blade, but we won't always have that. So before you start cutting and removing detail, just have a game plan first. That might seem like overthinking it, but quite honestly, you don't know how the knife is going to cut through any of this stuff, so it's better to be safe than sorry. So I'm just going to go through, and I'm going to run the knife over these again, because it won't necessarily get it all on the one shot, and you don't have to either. Again, never rush, if you can help it. I'm guilty of that sometimes. I rush because I get excited about things. And we've talked about that before, where, yeah, you get excited, but you have to learn to harness that excitement into focus. And it's difficult. It can be difficult sometimes. Who are we kidding, right? This is fun stuff to do. Okay, so the key with this too is that when you look at the shape, right, it's thinner at the leading edge of this tail than it is back here. So by placing the knife flat, the tip might actually be pointing up above the wing surface, and you don't want to gouge with the tip of your knife. So the way to mitigate that is by cutting closer to the base of the blade. Sorry, but let's get the focus. There we go. Is cutting at the base of the blade, then at the tip. Because if you put the tip in there, you're actually curving it around like this on a very small scale, and you'll gouge the plastic here. So it's best to use the base of the blade to do any work like this. Is there a time when you'll have to use the tip? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's up to your judgment, but usually it's for getting into nooks and crannies or a corner somewhere. But just be mindful that the tips of these will do more damage than you're expecting, and to control your blade accordingly. And that's best done with practice. So there we go. Now I've got the basics of those rivets removed. And you can see there from the light, the way it bounces off the plastic, that there's actually still some surface texture there from those bumps. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to sand it. And I'm going to use this sanding stick, the grit of which I'm not too sure. It's relatively smooth, but it should give me enough bite to do what I want here. So now I'm just going to work the sanding stick in a kind of like an oval shape here. The technique for sanding, really, I mean, people sometimes just go back and forth and that's it. I like to do things as circular as I can, especially in the finishing touches of it, because that will help alleviate any sort of grooves that you may sand into the object itself. And as you can see, now that they're becoming that lighter plastic color, that there was still material to remove, and I can still feel it under my thumb. Now, should you shy away from using a heavier grit? No. But keep in mind that the heavier the grit you use, the more you're going to have to attack it with lighter grits of sandpaper to bring it back up to this natural plastic shine. That shouldn't make you shy away from doing it. In some cases, you have to go heavy. You absolutely have to go heavy. But if you can, make sure you've gathered enough supplies to be able to work the plastic all the way back to completion. There we go, a little bit there, a little bit there. And you might not have to do all of them again. Some of them will comply sooner than other parts, in which case you don't want to over sand either. There's no magic equation to this. This is, quite honestly, I do it by feel. So I can feel, as I'm sanding this, I can feel this line here, this repair that I've made, and I'm going to attack that separately, notwithstanding the stuff that's going to get sanded by default from doing these rivets here. There we go. And this isn't, this is kind of the next step. We've talked about all the topical applications throughout the different tutorial videos, and this one's really getting you used to modifying the physical plastic itself. Quite honestly, if you've repaired something already, like we did with the one-shot video of the Night Force Stinger, it's really no different. Once you glue on a piece of styrene, or if you have the piece broken off, you glue it on, you want to sand away that join line. It's the same application, just on a for a different reason. And in this case, we're just removing some detail here. A lot of these techniques will cross over depending on what it is you're doing, which is a good thing, right? Why learn 50 different things when all you have to know is 3, right? Makes things simpler. So as I'm going here, I'm just check your work often. we're not too concerned about damaging any plastic, but depending on where you're sanding, you may have some detail you want to preserve. So you don't want to take things too far, especially if it's near something else. So you want to just check your work often. You don't want to go too far with any of this. Now, if there is something that you do want to protect, the simple answer is you just put tape over it to protect it. So let's say I was removing these rivets here, but there was a box, a panel here that was standing out, and I wanted to save that. I would just put tape over it, so my sanding stick would just bump up against it, and we could just work around that tape, and then when we were done, remove the tape. So when in doubt, protect with tape. It's really, and we already learned how to do that in the masking tutorial, right? So you're just masking off that detail to save it from any damage. This plastic is thankfully a little bit more, well, it's for the most part always going to be thicker than a model kit, but it's still a good practice, right? It lets you master the tools so you can get into those hard to reach places or those finer details and know that you can confidently go in and alter what you want. So I'm going to say that's good for now for the sanding portion. And I'm now going to move on to this unsightly repair scene here. And just to show you what I mean, I'm going to go a little bit harder on the sandpaper. This would work, but I want to show you what I mean when we dig in with some rougher sandpaper. So now I'm going to go in here with this bigger sheet. I'm not going to use the whole sheet. This is a 60, well actually what is it? Well, that doesn't help. I tore off all the parts that tells me what this is. Anyways, it's a heavier sheet of sanding paper. Significantly rougher than the sanding stick I was just using, but certainly not a 60 grit like this. There's not rocks glued onto this, so we're not that coarse. But as we do this, you'll see that the impact on the wing is much greater. And that's not to scare you off of this grit of sandpaper by any stretch of the imagination. There are times when you will indeed have to gouge. And the way I look at the different grits of sandpaper, the rougher it is, if you go on the rough side of the spectrum, that's for shaping. And then as you get finer and finer grits, that's for finishing and polishing, and then all the way up to buffing, if you will. So in this case, it's a little bit lighter than shaping. It's just got a little bit more bite to it. And this project, like I said in the intro video there, the first episode, this one actually became way more multifaceted than I was anticipating. But I didn't shy away from it. In fact, I thought it was exciting because then it really made it worthwhile doing a series on this project without repeating a lot of the same steps. And I can still feel that there. If your thumb runs over it, this will take some time. If you can still feel a change in the level of plastic or a bump or something that shouldn't be there, then just keep going. Don't be worried about sanding this thing into oblivion and losing the part. That's not really a concern. So just checking that out, you can feel this seam is mostly gone. There's a little bit still there. But this part here we might have to do some work on. And the thing with repairing damage, to be let's call it economizing our effort, that if you don't need to sand it, you don't. But that's the inside of the wing. And what I'm checking right now is to see, it sounds like a lazy way out, and quite honestly it is. It's the path of least resistance, is that this is the right side wing. So these two bars here indicate that this is the inside of this tail fin. So I'm going to put the landing gear on and see if it hides any of the blemishes that I need to repair. In which case, as long as the part sits flush and the way it should, then we won't need to sand anymore. Now, if you're into just doing it a perfect clean job all the time, hey, well done you. But there we go. So that's sorted down there. That's mostly sorted there. And you know what? You see that part? See how that landing gear fits flush with the tail? There and there? I'm not even going to worry about that blemish that's underneath where the landing gear sits. It will not be a problem. If it is, I'll eat my words and I'll fix it later. But, hey, what the heck. Okay, so there's still a little bit of a step there, so we got to keep going. Yeah, the trick to this is patience. What I like about doing the sanding, quite honestly, is it's relaxing. You don't want to push too hard. Don't force it. You can move quickly, but you don't want to force it. Just let the sandpaper do the work. You'll hear that a lot, right? Even with carpentry and stuff, is let the tools do the work for you. And this is no different. No different at all. And I'm just going over some of the rivet removal spots as well, because we may have to employ one other tool here, which we've used before, but now it's really going to come into play. And a lot of these that we're doing here are just basic model building skills, to be honest. Nothing here is too crazy. All of the skills I'm showing you are coming from my model building repertoire. And they're very handy, very handy. And when it comes to getting your tools, the bottom line up front is that I'm trying to give you the simplest solutions to help save you money. Because even if, you know, good economy, bad economy, whatever, who doesn't want to save money? Are there tools out there that can make a lot of this stuff easier? Sure. Are they necessarily budget savvy? No. So, time is money and all that jazz, but we're not here to make money yet. We'll be talking about that in a future episode. We are here to enjoy the process and do a good job, right? Because doing a good job means happiness, and happiness is success. So I'm done most of the stuff there. This isn't completely gone yet, and what I'm doing is I'm smoothing out the rest of the plastic because that will also work towards that end result. But then I'll have to make an assessment about whether or not I need to use some of that plastic putty I showed you. And there's nothing wrong with that, because with a lot of these repairs, especially depending on how many parts ended up, you might have little microscopic chunks missing, and the only way to fix it is with putty. Sanding is a good way to reduce something down, and you might need to build something up. Oh yeah, there we go. So you might not see it on camera, but this is already becoming way smoother than after I use this. So this stick is smoothing it out nicely. And I think I will have to employ that putty. The difficulty is when you're making these repairs, like I said, this blemish down here, that sort of Y-shaped thing, that upside down Y, I can hide that. If you can't hide that, you're committed to fixing it as best as you can. And that's really all there is to it. If you can live with damage like that, then that's cool too, right? I mean, all of these are your customs. They're your decisions to make. Where it becomes kind of not an option is if you're doing this for somebody else. Why would you hand somebody else something that's super smashed and broken? Or if you decide to be adventurous and go into a competition or something like that. Because little dents and dings like that could be the difference between winning and not winning. I won't call it losing. I mean, you're having fun by showing up there with your project anyway. But you may not take home that trophy. So. And the thing with sanding too, aside from everything else that we've been talking about, is it always looks worse before it looks better. And that has freaked me out in the past with sanding parts where they just, it looked like somebody was sanding it with a stick of dynamite. And you want to stop and go, oh my God, did I just ruin it? And the answer is no, you didn't. No, you didn't, right? You start rough and you work your way to fine. And then by the time you're done, you'll say, oh, wow, okay, that's perfect. And oh my God, I can't believe I just did that. So that's the size of it. That's really the size of it. And I hope that if you're following along with a Firebat, that you're having better success and you can actually skip over this part. But if not, and if you're following along with another vehicle, I hope your project is going very well. Very well. And by very well, I don't mean that smooth and flawless and you don't make any mistakes. I mean that if you do make a mistake, you recover from it. If you try a new tool and it works, then that's fantastic. Remember, success isn't a flat road. Success is making it to the end of the road. And then, of course, once you're done that project, you start the next one, so you get on a whole new road and start all over again. It's just fantastic. There we go. Yeah, the thing about sanding, I find this so relaxing. Absolutely relaxing. So if you're having a bad day, watch this part of the video. It's cathartic or whatever. I'll go easy on the big words. It's not even the weekend yet. There we go. So you can see now, by attacking these problem areas, that the area that's been sanded is much larger. So sure, we have the rivet points up here, which are very quickly disappearing. And we're currently working on this crack here, that there's scuff marks, right? Evidence of sanding in a much larger area, relatively speaking. That's all going to disappear. That is all going to disappear. Now at this point, while as you can clearly see on the camera, the difference there, this is actually very smooth. So this is where it becomes a little tricky. If the superfine buffing pads or cloths or whatever you end up using aren't available, is this good enough to stop and paint as far as texture goes? And that's something that the primer will sort out for you. The thing with priming, with a lot of these projects, we've taken a project apart, a vehicle apart, we've primed and painted and gone. But what happens if there's damage you have to repair? Primer is actually also used to show you anything you missed. So sometimes it's difficult. Your eye gets used to looking at this piece. Sometimes just by priming it, it'll draw your attention to something that your brain didn't even register. That's one of the other bonuses of priming. And what else it will do is it'll help verify your work. Because I could polish this to the high sheen that it originally was and still not notice something. And then by priming it, it'll say, oh, I actually completely forgot about this, or I could fix that a little bit better. And it's absolutely natural to work on this type of repair, prime, miss something, and prime again. There's nothing wrong with that. In certain model building scenarios, you will actually end up priming and sanding a whole bunch of times. As long as you're putting it on with your airbrush or putting it on in a well-disciplined manner, not putting on like horking on the paint, then that's just part of it. So you haven't failed. You've only failed if you quit. You've only failed if you quit. And we're trying not to quit, right? We talked about walking away from a project, but we're trying not to quit. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is that's pretty smooth. I'm going to show you the effect of some of these buffing pads. So we're going to start with the 3200. And the cool thing is, if you've never done much sanding before, whether it's, you know, projects at home or customs like this or model building or whatever, the finer the grit gets, once you're done with that grit, it's like, okay, I'm not doing anything more. When you switch grits, it'll sound like it's working again because you'll hear that grittiness. All the way up to, in my case, the 12,000 grit. But I'm just going to do a few swipes here and show you what I mean. So you remember how this was all that light red color here? There's a red versus blue joke in there, but you can see it already starting to disappear. It's not all the way there yet, but just by adding the one buffing pad, we're already there. Now when you're going to gradually lighter sanding grits, you don't have to go like rough, medium, coarse, whatever it is, medium, fine, super fine, ultra fine, whatever. You're not bound by the numbers to go up each increment. As long as you get the effect you want, you can skip a couple of layers. Recommended or not, well, that all depends on the effect you get when you're done. So I went from a, whatever that was, let's call it a, you know, a 200 for argument's sake. I went from a 200 to this sanding stick, which is not labeled anymore, right up to a 3200. And while this is relatively smooth, this is way smoother. So I'm certainly skipping a few grits to get to where I need to, but it's not proving to be detrimental. You can even do this with a shattered canopy. And speaking of it looking worse before it gets better, the canopy is the scariest thing to do, because in order to fix any damage to it, you've got to sand it with rough sandpaper. Then you will get this all foggy, and it will be like, oh my god, how do I ever make this look like a canopy again? You follow the same steps, and you will get it to clear plastic again. All right, so there we go. So there's a brief demo. I'll tell you what, I'll go up to the extreme and see what happens there. So I'm gonna go from 3,200 all the way up to 12,000. And I can hear it and feel it working. Just small circles. I'm not pressing super hard or anything like that. There, and you can already see it starting to shine again. You see that? So that's the magic of these things. Patience is the key. You're not in a rush. You want this to look good when it's done. It's already broken, so anything you do after that is a bonus. So as you can see, right now we're already at roughly the 25-minute mark on this video, and it may not seem like we've had much progress, but we've actually started to make our repair work disappear into the plastic. Now at this point, what I've got here is a bit of a misalignment, and what I have to do is I'm constantly checking it with my thumb. If you can do this and you notice something, then keep going in your repair work. It doesn't have to be sanding per se. And there's a little bit of a, almost like a warble in there where that joint is. So now I have to decide whether or not I'm going to employ putty. The other thing too is that now I'm going to take my fingernail where those rivets were, and I'm going to run it down. And if it stops anywhere, right there at the bottom, I'll either have raised plastic or the knife actually scooped it out and I need to fill that. So the filler I use, if you haven't seen previous videos, first off, shame on you. Just kidding, no judgment. And the putty I use, which is one of a few available, is an acrylic putty. And it's called Perfect Plastic Putty. Yeah, it's called this stuff. This is plastic putty. There's another one called Perfect Plastic Putty. And it's made by Vallejo. Both of them are acrylic putties. There are alcohol-based putties and oil-based putties out there. Read the label to see if it's something that you should take or not purchase based off of your health concerns. Also, wear gloves if you want to, or if you should, if it says so on the instructions. And you might need to do this more than once. Puttying is much like sanding and priming, where you might putty it, sand it down, and then it shrunk a bit, so you have to putty some more, sand it down, and carry on. It's a cumulative process, so don't be surprised if you don't get your puttying work done in one shot. That's not how it's designed to work necessarily anyway. What I like about this acrylic putty is that it's water-based, so I can actually squeeze it out. It comes out in a thick gel. It's designed to fill gaps on models and blemishes and stuff. I can squeeze this out, add some water to it, and turn it into almost like a Slurpee, in which case I can flow this putty into different nooks and crannies. So if you had a corner like this, by wetting this putty, you can get it right into that corner, and then you're good to go. You don't have to try and jam it in there with something. You just put it in wet, and it gets into all those nooks and crannies. The other bonus is because this is water-based, I can shape it where it needs to go by using either my wet finger or a wet Q-tip. And that will actually minimize the cleanup sanding you have to do afterwards. So this is one of the putties. The Perfect Plastic Putty is... There we go. Here's the other one. Both good products. There may be others out there. These are the ones I've found and used, and I have zero complaints because they are very, very user-friendly. So if this is your first time using a putty to repair a custom or whatnot, on any project for that matter, these are very forgiving. Very, very forgiving and effective. So on that note, now I've got to decide whether or not I'm going to putty these, and these will require probably a little bit of putty. I might just go hard with the sandpaper. The other thing that we have to fix is that you can see that wedge-shaped gap there on this crossbar that I'm definitely going to have to fill, because I can't. Sometimes you can sand a seam to make it disappear with no putty. Sometimes you can't. This is one of those cases because, as a glaring example, this one has a chunk missing. So I'm going to use some of that putty right now, and I'm going to show you exactly how it works. Just hang on one sec here. What I like doing when I make this stuff into a slurry is I use my paint palette. And this paint palette is one of these things. It's like $1 or something like that at a dollar store. You don't have to go buy some proprietary thing. It's a dollar store palette. Is that a lot of things you can mix your paint together in them. You can mix your putty slurry in them. All sorts of things. You can mix colors together for when you start getting into more complex schemes. So having one of those is very, very helpful. And that other tube is brand new, so for this project I'm going to use the Deluxe Perfect Plastic Putty, also because it's extremely fun to say. And the cool thing is too, and I think you can do this with oil-based putties, but honestly I haven't tried those yet. I stay away from oil-based products, is you can tint them with paint. You can absolutely tint them with paint. So if you wanted to put, let's say you were making something olive drab or you found an error afterwards, you put some olive drab paint in the putty, apply the putty as you would if it was uncolored, and boom, error gone. So keep that in mind. You can sand this stuff too when it's done. And it takes paint very well as well. So it should make any errors you have, damage or otherwise, disappear. So now what you can do is you can actually, depends on how you want to do this. You can put your water in one cup and your putty in another. You can put your putty in the bottom and your water in the other, put the putty on the edge. And I'm just going to take some in my brush and I'm going to put some in the water. And I'm going to see what that gets. Water's a little dirty, so it's a perfect example. Now I've got tinted putty. In this case, it doesn't really matter. It's really a good trick for doing finishing work, or if, let's say, you put your custom down and it gets knocked off after it's finished and something gets damaged, then you can tint the putty the same color as the plastic and that'll speed up the repair process. So in this case, I'm just going to brush it on. Will it get into the panel lines? Yes. In this case, I'm going to show you another trick to get rid of that. So now we're just going to brush it in there and it's going to stay. We got to let it dry. The good thing about acrylic putty over oil-based putty too is it dries way faster. And I'm going to do the same thing on this fin as well. There we go. Get it in there. And I'm just dabbing it in. You can brush it over, dab it in. The whole point is to get it to flow into that crevice that you have. There's no damage anywhere else there because I wasn't a clumsy silly goose on that one. And I'm just feeling the bottom of the fuselage here if I'm satisfied with that. And I am. I'm just going to hit it with one of those buffing pads to bring it up a bit. But there's no gouges in there I have to worry about. Then we just look at the rest of our project and see what else has to be done. And in this case, we are good to go because the main feature to remove was those lines of rivets to make room for our oversized sticker. So while that's drying, we are going to take an imaginary pause while this stuff dries and I will sand it off and show you the end result. So just hang on. Okay, everything's dry. So what I did here is I put putty on in a couple of different thicknesses. You saw me slather on this slurry of putty in certain places and I put it on thicker in others to do a little bit of a demonstration here for you. So I'm taking this sanding stick, which isn't that rough, and I'm going to rub this stuff off with a dry sanding stick. So you can see that it takes a while, and that's fine. And you'll just work your way on. As your sanding stick or your sandpaper becomes filled with the debris from sanding, you can check to make sure that it's you can wet sand with it, and that just means getting it wet. In which case I just dip it in my water and that'll wash off the stuff and give me a fresh sanding surface again. And this, it almost does a double action because it's water-based putty. It's almost a combination of the other of the two methods. So that's the one there. And then we just take some paper towel, wipe it off, and we're left with putty, hopefully only in the places we wanted it. If not, this is, like I said, you have to just reapply until you're satisfied with the end result. The second method for removing water-based putty is with a Q-tip. The disadvantage to this method is that you're technically re-wetting the putty and you might end up removing some of it from where you want it. Again, the answer is to just reapply dry and then wipe wet again. You can do this when it's wet too if you want it to go into a corner or something, or anything for that matter, to minimize, if not completely eliminate, the need to sand. But as you can see by using the Q-tip and then the dry side, it gets rid of the putty except for the places that you want to keep it. Okay, that's the theory. The next trick I'm going to show you is using your X-Acto knife. Now you've got your cutting edge and your non-cutting edge. I want you to take the non-cutting edge, and you can see how there's putty that light line here where the rudder is, you're going to take the back edge of that, the non-cutting edge of your blade, and you're going to run it in there. And what that's going to do, wipe it off on the paper towel, is it's going to clear out any junk that's in there without cutting into the plastic. You can even, if it's a fine enough point, you can do it sideways. And there it clears out all the putty. That will also help you in certain situations. Now this putty here is a little thicker. We're just going to sand that off. The thickness of the putty helps its flow. When in doubt, you could always put on a little bit more than you think you need. Because if it does shrink a bit, then you can compensate for that. There we go, it's coming right off. There it is. Feels pretty good. Pretty good. Something like this will take a little bit of extra work. The reason being is that it was molded that way, so the surrounding plastic around each one of these rivets is also a little bit higher than the surface of the tail itself, or the fin. And that's just something you'll have to work with when you're doing your cleanup and your putty applications until you are satisfied. Like I said, don't be frustrated if you can't get it done on the first round. This might take quite a few to get it down to where I want it. And it is time consuming. But I promise you that if it gets executed well, you will be very happy with the result. It's hard to tell. My thumb. Sometimes you won't even notice, right? This is why we're talking about priming. I can't tell if that's 100% good to go. Maybe it's because of the pad of my thumb or whatever. My other fingers aren't all that much better. But like I said, it might take more than one go, and priming might help reveal something that you didn't notice you're missing. In which case, you just need to keep going. The other thing I wanted to draw your attention to is this part here. This is the part that snapped off in the corner. You can still kind of see the join line there, and I've sanded it a bit already. I've also taken the back edge of my knife and scraped out some of the super glue, the watery super glue there. So that's coming along. I test fitted this. It went in just fine back into the wing joint, but then when I tried to remove it again, it snapped in the same place. So that's forced me to make the decision that once I paint this and reattach, I'll paint it and clear coat it as a completely separate piece. And then when I put it back on, if it breaks, I'll repair it in place. So I will have the wing sitting in the fuselage here. And I won't put it in now because I haven't painted it yet. But if it breaks, I will sit it where it needs to be, and then I will put that part back on with the wing in situ. Because what I want to do is I want to preserve the functionality of this wing joint being able to move. We also have the exact opposite problem on this side. And what happened there was that the wing itself is fine, but the joint that it connects to broke. So if I firmly seat this wing in here, it will sit there and I give it a shake and it won't move. It will sit there, and it will sit there as like in its flying form. But if I want to fold the wings up to save space or whatever, as soon as I rotate it, it comes off. The reason is that that secondary cap doesn't come over. It's snapped off and I can't find it. So it's gone. We'll have to make a new one. If you don't care about the functionality and this has happened to you on anything, any of your projects, then maybe glue it in place or just sit it on there, and remember that if you want to fold the wings, you'll have to jerry-rig something because it won't even sit there in the folded position. Well, necessarily. Let's see if I'm a liar. Yeah, it'll sit there. But, yeah, you'll just have to have it fall off and then sit, like firmly press it into place for flying position. Okay. In this case, we're going to challenge ourselves and we are going to repair that. But that's another product that we're going to talk about coming up. Back to the fin here. So there was that V crack in there, and I've puttied that over. I'm going to sand that as well. And in this case, because we're replicating a three-dimensional object, in which case the three-dimensional object is this spar that goes across here. It's got rectangular edges to it. We're going to sand it flush with each surface. So this wide surface here, I'm going to make sure that it's flush there. And you don't necessarily want to use the wet method because you want the putty to maintain that shape. That feels pretty good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my sanding stick up against that other side and I'm going to sand it like that as well. Because the detail doesn't stick out that much, I'm going much slower. And I'm just shaping it to fit in there. Yeah, that's good. Now I'm addressing the flat part perpendicular to it. And minus a little bit more cleanup and buffing, we've now filled that gap. And if through my sanding, I end up taking away too much in my cleanup, then I'll just add more to it and repeat the same process. We always got to respect the process, right? So there it is. So I'm going to keep cleaning up this wing. And we're going to call it there for this episode because we've gone quite long, but I wanted you to see those processes. So using the back of your knife to clear out your panel lines, okay, is the one tip. The water-based putty is another reminder. This is just another version of it, right? This is the deluxe perfect plastic putty. Go to your local hobby store or craft store, see what they've got, and go with that. You can use alcohol-based putties if you wish. Just remember that they're alcohol-based. They can still be wet sanded, but you can't do the Q-tip thing with them so much. You have to use rubbing alcohol or paint thinner or something like that. And I like to stay away from that stuff as much as I can. And that's it. So don't stop until you're satisfied. And if you think you're satisfied and you prime and you see the mistake, then you can go back and fix it. Having to reprime that one spot is just fine. It's all part of the process, so nothing's gone wrong. So let's call it on this episode. I hope all your projects are going very well. To all my subscribers, thank you again. And if you did join us for the first time here, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode where we carry on with the cartoon accurate Sunbow Firebat. So thanks for watching, be safe, and have fun.